Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I promise I'll make you up that last minute so you got your full time. But as he said, my name is Taylor Randall Singleton. I guess still a fairly new extension specialist here in Tifton. My area is sustainability, but particularly pesticide stewardship. So I'd like to take just a minute. I actually originally had taken this slide out, but I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman last night. When I said sustainability, he kind of groaned. He's like, "Oh, sustainability, that's just another thing we got to keep up with, another label." You know, we hear about sustainability, we hear sustainable, renewable, environmentally friendly, natural resources, but what is You're good. What does sustainability actually mean to the farm? Well, to me, sustainability is surviving. We have so much stuff that we're confronted with every year on the farm. So many things that we have to encounter. Rising input prices, market prices that continue to go down. We have more and more extreme weather, it seems like. Tremendous regulatory challenges, which I'm going to touch on a little bit today. But I just want you to know, from this new position of sustainability within Extension, for us, Georgia Cotton Sustainability is having productive farmlands that have a profitable product. They have healthy land, healthy water and habitat for other ecological services, and of course have generational farms that continue to steward the land year after year. So to me, a true sustainable farm are practices that lead to us staying in business, keeping that land and agriculture, and protecting the environment while we do that. So there's three things that I want to touch on very quickly today, three things that I think really tie into ensuring that we have farms that continue to persist for generations. And one of those is particularly pesticide stewardship. And so right now, I think that we probably all can agree with this, that pesticide use is critical to our production. I know I don't need to put this slide up here, but I do like to put it up if I'm in front of a non-ag audience or maybe some groups that are a little more removed from the farm, because I think it's really important to understand that we need the option to use pesticide products when we need them. We need to have the option to use them at rates that are effective for us and at use patterns that are also effective for us on the farm. And so this use is continuously challenged, whether that's regulatory, which we're all very familiar with over the last couple of years, a public perception, resistance, or research and development. So lots of issues really plaguing pesticide use moving into the future. And so if this is not something that's already on your radar, I really encourage you to stop before you go into the growing season and just think about the challenges that we face with pesticide use as we move forward. And so we really need to start thinking about the future. How do we work together to protect our pesticide use and ensure that we have access to the products as we move into the future? And so there's really a couple things that come to mind for me regarding pesticide stewardship, and are things that I hope that you start to think about and continue to think about as we move forward. And of course, we have to keep those applications on target. That's a message that's been conveyed to you for the last 11 years of using pesticides wisely. But it's also really important to understand that in order to protect our ability to use pesticide products, first of all, they have to be safe for us to apply as the applicator, but they also have to be safe for those around us, so our families, the consumer, as well as the environment. So we have to keep all of that in mind when we use pesticide products. We have to continue and encourage support of and protection of endangered and threatened species and other sensitive species. So whether that's actually an endangered species itself, a pollinator species, or just a sensitive plant species to that particular product. We have to continue following the label. And then something that we need to start talking about is minimizing use where it's applicable. We need to minimize pesticide use where it's applicable. It's not always applicable, but there are situations where it is. And so I think that's a conversation that we have to have moving into the future as well. But ultimately, this is a group effort. It's going to take everybody working together to make sure that we protect our ability to use these products on the farm. So of course, remember your on-target applications, you're using pesticides wisely trainings from the last decade. This year, more importantly than ever, it's really critical that we ensure that we're using the correct product and the correct formulations for whatever production scenario that we're in. And then we need to keep in mind the protection of those endangered species. But my pointer doesn't work. It's going to take all of us working together. That includes the chemical companies, that includes the regulatory agencies. So not only the EPA, the regulatory agency responsible for registering the product, but also the regulatory agencies protecting these sensitive species. And then it also takes us cooperating as the end user, really all of us working together to protect this pesticide use. So I'm sure this slide looks very familiar to you if you've been going to UPWs for the last decade, so I won't spend a ton of time here. Dr. Culpepper's been sharing this message with you for a long time, but really just making sure that we keep our pesticides where they intend to go is the #1 way that we can steward our products and protect our ability to use them into the future. So just a couple things to stop and think about as we go into the growing season again this year. Just understand the parameters around your actual application. So think about how you're actually physically applying that product. Understanding the relationship between the particular spray tip, the spray pressure, how fast you're driving that sprayer, how high are you holding that boom, what kind of equipment and technology are you using that helps keep that product in the field. Just take a look at those parameters, understand what you're doing, and make sure you're making a smart decision when it comes to actually physically applying that product. Understand that what you're putting in the tank can directly influence its ability to stay on target or move somewhere else. So understanding your additives and the relationship that it has with the proper pesticide formulation that you're putting into that tank. Understanding how that impacts your on-target pesticide application. And then understanding what the conditions around the actual application are. Is there a higher wind? Is the wind a little bit lower? Is there a potential for a temperature inversion? What's the terrain of your land? How is that going to influence the ability of that product to potentially move? What's the size of your target plant? And then what's the relative humidity? All of these factors directly influence the ability of that product to stay in the field. And then stopping and taking a look at what's actually going on around you. What are the potential risks of using that pesticide product in that particular scenario? Is there a likelihood if that product was to move that there could be a significant risk, significant harm to something outside of that field? So taking a look at your surrounding landscape and just understanding what's going on around you. Okay, so I'd like to take a couple minutes to briefly talk about some of the updates from the Endangered Species Act regulation. I won't spend a ton of time here because I hope you were able to go to I think it's at 10:30. Dr. Culpepper is going to go more in depth on kind of what this process has looked like so far, kind of the background and leading up to where we're at today. But I will talk a little bit more about some of the specifics. So if you have any questions at any point during this section, please stop me and we can discuss it. But ultimately, I hope by now you're familiar that pesticide use is going to change a little bit moving into the future. Over the last couple years, we've been talking about how courts have challenged pesticide registrations for their lack of ESA compliance. This is a federal law that hasn't been upheld ultimately for the last 50 years when registering or re-registering pesticide products. And so ultimately, courts have mandated that pesticide registration, whether again that's an initial registration or a re-registration, which happens every 15 years, will have to comply with the Endangered Species Act, this federal law moving forward. And so EPA has basically created a framework and outline for how they are going to evaluate these pesticide products moving forward, starting in August of 24, to make sure that they are in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And so ultimately, this framework, this evaluation is going to ensure compliance, so protecting that pesticide product from vulnerability in the court system. So this is really, really valuable to us at the field level because our ability to use that product is now going to be protected from ESA compliance. And so ultimately what this means at the field is that we're going to have two changes coming to our pesticide labels. We are going to have to minimize pesticide drift, which we're extremely familiar with. We've been doing that for years with dicamba, but we're also going to have to minimize pesticide runoff of that treated product from that actual field itself. And so this herbicide strategy will be implied whenever a product is initially registered, so when a new product goes through its initial registration, or when a product is re-registered. It will then be evaluated under this lens, and these regulations will then be placed on the use of that product. So right now, only the herbicide strategy, so the evaluation lens for herbicides is finalized. So as herbicides are moving forward, these regulations are placed on them, but we'll see insecticides in the next year or so, and then fungicides will follow. So ultimately, these concepts will apply to all pesticide products moving forward. And it's important to know that no broad restrictions are being placed on these products today, but as that product, a new product is registered or it's re-registered, that's when we will see these restrictions being placed on the product. So very important, no need to panic today, no major changes today, just something to keep on your radar as we move into the next couple years because that's when we'll start to see new labels and new changes show up on those labels. So what does this actually mean from a farm perspective? Basically, as a new label comes out or a product is re-registered and has an updated label release, there's going to be 3 new components to that label. The first is there's going to be a section that addresses spray drift mitigation. So you're very familiar with this. This was very similar to what was on the dicamba label. Basically, applicators will be asked to implement a downwind buffer to protect a potential habitat outside of that treated field. This downwind buffer ranges anywhere from 0 to 230 feet. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. The second component that you'll see on new labels moving forward is runoff and erosion mitigation. Basically, there will be a section that outlines the practices, the number of points that growers will be asked to implement before using the product. These number of points represent a number of different practices that are available on a mitigation menu. Growers will go to the mitigation menu, see what practices are applicable to them on their farm, select a number of practices to get them to 9 points, and that will allow them to use that product in the correct manner. And then finally, the third section that will start to show up on pesticide labels, and it's actually, there's some language already on pesticide labels, is addressing areas that are particularly sensitive to endangered species. These are called pesticide use limitation areas. These areas have particularly vulnerable species or need a little bit of extra protection from pesticides. These areas are outlined in Bulletin's Lab 2, and we've been talking about that for a couple years. But ultimately, growers and applicators will need to go to the label, access Bulletin's Lab 2, which is a website, and then see if they are in an area where particularly vulnerable species are located and additional mitigations are necessary. So let's talk a little bit about the buffer. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this right now, but we can definitely talk about it if you have additional questions. But ultimately, a buffer between 0 and 230 feet will be required depending on the toxicity of the individual product and what its likelihood of impacting endangered species and its areas of use are. But ultimately, there are going to be a lot of options available for growers to implement in order to reduce that buffer down. So here's a couple examples of some of the options available that growers can implement to effectively reduce that buffer down. And so when you actually start to look into the list and look at the options available, each of these have a different reduction value associated with them. So say you implement a lower boom, which we hope everybody can do, use a larger droplet size where it's applicable. Things like this will allow you to reduce that buffer down depending on your application scenario. But ultimately, there are options available that you can reduce that buffer down to 0, 100% reduction. So very thankful that the EPA incorporated that flexibility into this list for us. And so many options available. Chances are you're doing many of these and you'll be good to go on that buffer. But something that's newer to us is the erosion and runoff mitigation component of the label. So again, depending on the toxicity of the product, its persistence, its ability to move out of that pesticide application area and into the environment, there are a certain number of points that will be required in order to use that product. And so say the label has a value of 9 points associated with it, which is the maximum amount of points that would be required. You would then go to what's called the mitigation menu and select a number of practices that would get you to 9 points. So I just pulled a couple of these practices out here. There's over 40 on the actual mitigation menu itself, but I felt like these were a little more applicable here to us in Georgia. But basically, each practice has a point value associated with it, which associates to the value or the ability of that practice to mitigate runoff itself. So practices range anywhere from 0 to 3 points. And so you would go to the mitigation menu, you would select a number of practices that would get you to whatever the label has specified. So in our scenario, we need 9 points. We would go to this list and we would select a number of practices to get to 9 points or whatever that value is. So lots of flexibility has been built into this process, into this evaluation. And so many growers in Georgia are not going to have to change what they're already doing. There's a lot of flexibility based on the practices and what you're already doing here. So before I wrap up on the ESA, again, if you can go to Dr. Culpepper's session at 10:30, he's going to talk a little bit more about the process, how we got here, and what it looks like moving forward. These are a little more specific details. So are there any questions on ESA before I move on? We can talk at the end if something comes to mind. Every 15 years. So a pesticide is evaluated every 15 years, and that's when the regulatory agencies take a look at, is there any new science, any new data available for that product on the human health side of things, safety, environmental toxicity, and so all of that's evaluated every 15 years.
Does the company that's selling it, are they the ones that have to pay for this, or who pays for that?
Oh, that's a good question.
I worry about like generics, like nobody's really making a lot of money off of it.
Well, so this evaluation is being completed by ESA as part of their registration process. Nick, do you want to add anything to that? This is part of the EPA regulatory process. The question was who is paying for it. I mean, that would be part of the registration and re-registration. So it's being done under federal. Okay. But I think this is a good segue into, as we go into the growing season, we're in this time of I think we could consider it a little bit uncertainty, just a new era for us in pesticide use and pesticide stewardship. And I think it's really important that we just acknowledge, stop and take a second to look at what's going on around us. As we make our pesticide applications, it's important to know, are we near a forested area that could potentially be a habitat of an endangered species or a sensitive water body, or do we farm near particularly sensitive habitat for wildlife species, or maybe you apply a pesticide in one of these scenarios down here. You're in a more urban area, you're surrounded by houses, you have flower gardens or home gardens near you, or maybe you put a pesticide product out and you're surrounded you're in a diverse area with many different crops. And so I think it's a really good idea, and I know this has been a message that has been talked about for years, but I just encourage you as you go into the growing season this year to just pause for a second before you make your application and just think about a couple things. Talk to your neighbors, just communicate with what's going on, understand what's happening with the environment. Is there a wind event? Is there potential for an inversion? Is there a significant weather event coming in? If you make that pesticide application and you have a lot of water coming in, a big rainfall is coming, where is that water potentially going to go? Are there sensitive species around me, whether that's an endangered species, a plant species, a flower garden, or a sensitive crop species? Are there habitats around me? Are the bees more active? And just think for a second before you make that application. For a year with so much uncertainty, for a questionable decision, for a questionable pesticide application, is the risk worth the reward? Or at a time where significant mistakes or we get into a particular scenario or maybe not the best decision was made and could jeopardize things for everybody as far as pesticide products. And so just think about that. Is the risk worth the reward for this application? I think we would probably all agree that we are in a time where pesticide use is particularly challenged right now, whether that's decisions made in the court or, we're in such an era of visibility, and we're really, I think, at a crossroads where we can continue to do the right thing and make good pesticide decisions, protect our ability to use those products into the future, or make questionable decisions and really take many steps back in our fight to keep pesticide products. So just remember, as we go into the season, our actions right now, this year particularly, and moving into the future, directly influence our ability to register and use pesticide products into the future. So just think about that as we go into the growing season, just a couple things to keep in mind. I know I'm starting to get close to my time, but I would like to talk a little bit about pesticide applicator safety. So this is a big issue, and I don't know that we talk about it enough, but as far as pesticide stewardship, I think one of the quickest ways that we could lose our ability to use a pesticide product is if it is not safe, if we don't use it in a way that is safe for us, the applicator. So I think it's really important to just have the reminder out there that safety calculations for pesticide products assume that we are wearing our PPE. So I know everybody is wearing their PPE. At a minimum, that's outlined on the label, of course, depending on the product that you're using. Most of the times that's long pants, long sleeves, shoes, gloves, and then some kind of protective eyewear. But I actually got a couple slides from Dr. Allison Johnson. She's the UGA Pesticide Safety Education Coordinator. She is awesome. Puts together so much information on pesticide safety and just PPE in general. But a couple things that she wanted me to highlight is just understanding that we need to make sure that we're wearing our PPE, especially at times where we are at highest risk of exposure. And so think about mixing and loading when you're climbing up onto that sprayer and you've got that jug of pesticide in your hand. Just making sure that if we are wearing our PPE, because if we accidentally get some on us, and that's when that product is at its highest concentration and our risk for exposure is greatest. And so just making sure we're wearing our PPE, we're wearing our PPE when we apply, and then when we clean and calibrate our equipment as well. And so talking about your potential risk for pesticide exposure is really a combination of the toxicity of that individual product itself, but also our exposure to that product over time. So think about your exposure to pesticide products over your entire lifetime. You've been farming for a long time. You know, how much pesticide are you potentially exposing yourself to? We can reduce that to absolutely nothing by wearing our PPE. And so at a minimum, please at least remember to wear your gloves. I know it's a hard thing to do, but wearing gloves can significantly reduce your pesticide exposure. So think about the stuff you may potentially, hypothetically, splash onto your hands. As you touch your truck door handle, you grab your steering wheel, you drive the tractor, you get in and out of things throughout the day, you wipe your hands on your pants. If you were to wear gloves, you can potentially reduce exposure in all of those scenarios. So just wear your gloves. It's an extra layer of chemical resistant skin. Fortunately, no cotton gloves. Wear some sort of chemical resistant gloves. She recommends some of these reusable gloves, and you can wash them in between, but I like disposable gloves. It's super easy. You can find them at all of these places. It is very easy to get a hold of some chemical resistant gloves. I actually buy them from my dad on Amazon, and you can buy them on Amazon, 20 bucks for a pack of 100. That'll probably last you a year or maybe a growing season anyways, but super easy to get a hold of. One of the best things that you can do to protect yourself, protect your health, and also protect your family from any potential pesticide residue exposure. Another thing I think is really important to mention, and I don't think we talk about this enough, is just what can we do to protect our family and those around us. And one of the best things that we can do is handle our laundry. So when you go home, think about the things that you've been exposed to throughout the day. You potentially have pesticide residues on you. If you wash your laundry with your families, you could potentially expose them as well. So separate your clothes out, wash them separately, wash them in hot water, double rinse them, and then air dry them outside or put them in a hot dryer, just making sure you break down those pesticide residues and don't potentially expose your family to those products as well. All right, this is a big one. This one has been super popular at county meetings over the last couple days. But I think as we talk about pesticide stewardship and our ability to protect the use of these products moving into the future, we've got to be smart about how we dispose of our products. So be very smart about how you dispose of your products. Think about the environmentally conscious. You know, we have everybody has their various methods of doing this, but just think about not only the environmentally conscious side of things, but also, you know, what can we do responsibly to protect our stewardship fight. So think about the challenges that we face when you go to remove your pesticide jugs. Handle the leftovers, triple rinse the jugs, punch a hole in them, and then there's a couple options available if you're interested in actually recycling those containers. If you've got pesticides available or still remaining in those jugs, you can send them to the Georgia Clean Day. I haven't heard of any for 25 yet. Any announced for 25? Okay, well, we'll let you know when there's some announced for 25. But if you have a clean jug, there's actually a couple options available for recycling. So this is really interesting to me. There's a couple groups out there right now that are taking these jugs, clean containers, turning them into resin pellets, and then actually recycling them and making new products out of them. And there's a couple examples here on the bottom of the screen. But if you're an applicator, I'm going to stop here for a second so you can take a picture of this slide. We have two local options available for container recycling. The first one here is local to us here in South Georgia. You can actually call them and they'll come pick up your container pile for free. So think about, you know, recycling that container pile versus, you know, other methods of disposal. And then here is another option, USA Recycling. They're nationwide, and I believe this is actually who is contracted with Department of Ag for the clean days. But you can request container pickup from them as well at this number. So might be a good thing to do, get with your neighbors, coordinate a pickup route with these folks, and let them come pick up that jug container pile that you've got to do something with anyways. So this is my last slide. Just moving into the future, we have a tremendous number of challenges ahead of us, not only in pesticide stewardship, but there's just a lot of fluctuation right now with the market, a lot of challenges that we face. And I absolutely recognize that this is not the year to be trying new things. Margins are extremely tight. We just got to make it through the year, and hopefully things will get better. But as we go into the future, I really encourage you to think about, what of these land conservation practices, these traditional stewardship practices, maybe you already implement some of these on your farm, but maybe there's some that you're interested in trying as we move into the future. Things that not only help mitigate our movement of pesticide products, but also help protect our land, protect our soil health, and just keep that dirt in the field. So just a couple things to think about as we go into the future. But that's all I've got right now. I think we've got maybe a minute or two for questions. If you have any, be happy to talk a little bit more about ESA or any questions that you have.
All right, I'm Phillip Roberts. I did enjoy that, Taylor. She does a great job, and that's such an important area. And Taylor, I think you're the only one of your kind in the country, a sustainability specialist. Is that true? Kinda. So, she wants to hear from you. So she's doing everything she can to help you as growers and to help this industry. But we're going to take a little bit and talk about insects and insect pest management. And I'm primarily going to talk about plant bugs today. But before we get there, I just want to introduce you to something. And some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not. But there's something called a cotton jassid, okay? And that's a pest that's native to Asia. In 2023, it was found in the Virgin Islands in Puerto Rico. Now, the bad thing is, in 2024, it was found in Florida, from around Miami and South Florida all the way up to Jackson County. That's that top red dot. That's around Marianna, I think, is the county seat for Jackson County. But it's called a cotton jassid. But in other parts of the world, it's a pest of cotton, okra, eggplant, sunflowers, and a lot of other things. But for all you agents, consultants, scouts, growers, we got to be on the lookout for this thing. It's pretty easy to identify. It looks like it's a leaf hopper, but it's got these two spots on the adults. All right? But I just ask you that. If we don't know what these cold temperatures are going to do to this insect, they are sensitive to some cold temperatures. But just the fact that it was found in Jackson County is worthy of all of us knowing about it. I can assure you, all our county agents, several in here, Kale, better be looking for this thing down there in Grady County. But myself and others, we're going to be looking for this pest. But we're going to refer to it as the cotton jassid, but it's a sucking insect just like a leafhopper. You're familiar with potato leafhoppers on peanut, but they're going to feed on the underside of the leaf, going to rupture cells. Symptoms are yellowing, reddening. You're familiar with hopper burn on peanut, looks somewhat like that. The leaves can turn reddish, they can even crinkle and curl. But if you see something that's unusual in a cotton field, we need to be looking for these little green bugs, okay? They're tiny. You're familiar with little leaf hoppers in peanuts, about the same size. We probably, the first time we see this thing, we're going to see a funky looking plant and notice the insect. But there's just some pictures of various things, various crops. There's not a lot of information you can find out there. This just really came about just in the last month. But there's a cotton plant. Those leaves look kind of funky looking. Here's some, I think this one is okra, but just something doesn't look right. So when you're troubleshooting or see something unusual, just look for this little insect here. Here's one, an adult. Here's a little immature, but they're going to be on the bottom sides of the leaves. Now, if you want to read a pest alert, the Florida Department of Ag put something out. They referred to it as a two-spot cotton leafhopper. I can't say that. Two-spot cotton leafhopper. So I was actually at a meeting yesterday, and the entomologists in the southeast, we're just going to call it a cotton jassid. That's what it's been called in other parts of the world. But that may change. But if you suspect anything, please get in touch with your county agent. we'll be there ASAP. All right? I tried to do a QR code that'll pull up that pest alert if you want to read more about it. All right, any questions on that? I really don't know a lot about it. Yeah? Just foliage, is my understanding. It's going to be on the undersides of the leaves.
What kind of numbers do they gather?
It's my understanding they can be at pretty high numbers. They can be an economic problem, all right, in other parts of the world. No. It's just the way I understand it, again, this is new, you're just going to see the leaf decline, and if you let it go, you're going to start just shedding leaves, and it's just plant health is just going to go downhill. Good question. Good question. I can assure you if we find a field where these things are, within 24 hours there will be some juice sprayed on them, and with 24 hours I can answer that question. I mean, that's our job, and yeah. So that group of insects can, but this particular insect, no. And that's listed. There's a pretty good summary on this pest alert that Florida put out.
I assume they're as mobile as other leafhoppers.
Yes. Yes. So we've looked at some other species of leafhoppers. We were at a meeting yesterday and we were looking at migration patterns. Like, this thing is sensitive to cold temperatures, but I mean, when you try to understand some of the materials from other parts of the world, it's a little sketchy to interpret. But yes, there's some leafhoppers that have moved from, I forget the species, that overwintered in Arkansas and made it to Saskatchewan, Canada. So these things can move, but whether they move in numbers that are high enough to matter, who knows? Something to keep an eye out on. Okra is probably one of the most preferred hosts for some of you vegetable folks. Just a quick plug for our Scout Schools, first Monday in June. Myself and Dr. Mark Abney will spend half a day talking about cotton, peanut, and soybean insects. Taylor, great opportunity to talk about safety when you're checking cotton. So you see those dates?
I'll write it down.
Midville, second Tuesday in June. All right. I really want to spend the rest of this time talking about plant bugs, and if we have discussion, that's great. All right. Not everyone has dealt with plant bugs, but we have some situations that everybody needs to be a little more up to date on plant bugs and how to handle this thing. But for years, we considered plant bugs really just to be a pre-bloom pest. You know, we monitor retention. If we hold 80% of the fruit when we're going into bloom, we're good to go. We got maximum yield potential. You know, if you look at over the last 3 or 4 years, we've sprayed more plant bugs. I think everyone would agree. We've primarily been spraying plant bugs on pre-bloom cotton. Spray some fields once, some fields twice. And then we get into bloom, we spray stink bugs, everything. I mean, we don't really think about plant bugs a lot more. 2024 is a little different. We had some pretty serious situations in parts of Georgia during July and August and even into September. But in 2024, just to kind of walk you through it, it was no different than 2023 or 2021. Agents and consultants and whatnot out there, you know, we run sweep nets, we spray plant bugs here or there. Everything looked normal. It looked like we were spraying about how we've been being the last couple years. But when things got bad was after bloom. Now I got this new computer program and it's really good at illustrating where plant bugs are an issue. But what I've tried to do, these dark shaded areas, that's where we had these problems with plant bugs after bloom. That's where we had just really high populations in some fields of immature plant bugs, both tarnished plant bug and clouded plant bug. And I think that's kind of accurate. To me, it's like the epicenter over the last few years has been this part of the state, but we saw it here. But I really believe this thing is moving from west to east. This light shaded area, you know, we treated plant bugs in this area, and when we get to East Georgia, we can find them, but there's very few fields treated. Now, there's still some cotton treated in East Georgia, but that kind of depicts where the problem areas were. So if you're in one of those areas further east, you know, just be aware of these things, because what we observed last year, Seth, is where we missed them and got behind, we never caught them. Agreed? And we suffered yield losses even after spending a significant amount of money trying to control a situation that got away from us. I think it's important we understand why it happened, or why I believe it happened. A lot of people in this room have helped me collect insects. We've done it, Justin, Seth, Scott. We've collected insects from a lot of areas of Georgia. And we screen those for susceptibility to certain insecticides. I work with a lot of other people. Sarah, who works, my coworker, she ships insects a lot. And, you know, there's only one thing harder than killing an insect. Y'all know what that is? Keeping it alive. But one of the reasons we had this late season plant bugs is we were not controlling plant bugs with bifenthrin. How much bifenthrin do we spray on cotton in Georgia? 3rd week of bloom, 5th week of bloom? A lot. But it didn't take long. I mean, it was obvious we weren't getting acceptable control. But just out of happen chance, in 2018, we had collected some plant bugs, and we sent them to an entomologist at Virginia Tech, and they screened them for susceptibility. And you people are familiar with resistance ratios, okay? And in insects, I don't know about weeds, but if we get 10x resistance ratio, we start getting concerned. 2018 plant bugs was a 2x resistant ratio. Nothing, no problem. 2024, 77. So that supported, this is just one location. We collected them in Tifton, but that explained why we were seeing field failures with bifenthrin on plant bugs. So one of our tasks this spring is we're going to be looking at susceptibility to see how widespread this is. So to be determined, but a point you need to take home today is bifenthrin did not kill plant bugs in 2024 on southwest Georgia, and it's probably not going to kill them in 2025, right? So if we're dealing with plant bugs after bloom, if plant bugs are out there, you're going to have a little more juice other than just a pyrethroid. So I want to talk about some strategies, and here's where I'm looking for input, but this is just my take. We've got 10 minutes. Pre-bloom, nothing changes, really. Nothing changes, all right? Use sweep nets, use retention. The only change, we might be a little more aggressive with diamond, and I got that on the next slide. Post-bloom, we're going to have to start using drop cloths in some of these problem fields, especially if you see a dirty bloom. The other thing to consider, if you're in one of those problem areas, Seth, Terrell County, Paul, you know, I think we got to look at using these two technologies in these problem areas to help manage risk. One is Thrive On. All of you are familiar with Thrive On. It's not a cure-all, but that's a decision you got to make right now if you're going to use a Thrive On variety, right? We still have to scout Thrive On for plant bugs. We may have to treat Thrive On for plant bugs, but it definitely reduces plant bug populations, not eliminates, and it reduces the need to treat cotton when you use that technology. If you're not using Thrive On, another technology is Novel Uron or diamond. A little bit of diamond is used on cotton. A lot of you guys have used it on peanuts for lessers, right? So you're familiar with the product. It's only active on the immatures, all right? In other parts of the cotton belt where they know they're going to have immature plant bugs, it's easy. They put diamond out. in Georgia, especially when we're not 100% if we're going to have them or not, becomes a little more difficult. As Taylor said, margins are tight. We don't want to spend any more than we have to. But neither of those is a cure-all, but I really believe both of these keep us from getting in trouble. Just want to illustrate, you have to spray Thrive On. We got a yield response in 2023, spraying Thrive On, okay? A little bit about diamond. Again, it's a growth regulator. It does not control adults. It only is active on the nymphs. So if you have a nymphs in the field, you have to tank mix something with diamond to control the adults. But you get the residual of the diamond on the nymphs. We're going to be looking at a couple different rates. If we're in front of a problem, 6 ounces. If the problem is there, 9 ounces, but there's the residual you expect to see. But ideally, we want to be in front of plant bugs. If you know you're going to have immature plant bugs, it's easy. Paul, you may have some fields where you know you're going to have them. I probably would start with 6 ounces of diamond and get in front of them. An ideal time to put it is right before you bloom. Be in front of these hatching nymphs. Now, in Georgia, especially in areas where you are not for sure you're going to have nymphs. And again, this is just our best recommendation. We don't have all of this completely just right, dialed in. But if you're making a second application on adults, I think you need to put diamond in on that second application when you're going over the field. If you had adults in the field for 2 weeks and they're dumping eggs, those immatures are coming. Again, it's being proactive. But you know, that's where we are, is knowing when to initiate that diamond application. I'm very confident in what it brings to the table. Where I'm still trying to understand it is how we really know when we have to use it. But if you're making a second application specifically for plant bugs, I would add it. If nymphs are there, especially if they're above threshold, I would add it because you need that residual activity. I think that's where we are. One thing, just as a reminder, and then we have some questions or comments. I think we don't fully understand that plant bugs feed on small bowls. They can. Plant bugs can feed on large squares. They can. A lot of you saw dirty blooms. That's where plant bugs have fed on large squares. If you see a dirty bloom, you need a drop cloth. I saw a lot of drop cloths from some of our agents last year that still had crease marks where they unfolded them, when they got them several years ago. But I hope we don't have to deal. This thing just seems to be spreading to me, and you just need to be on top of it. Where we're behind, we were in trouble last year, and we're trying to get growers to tighten application intervals. If you go to the Mid-South, where they deal with plant bugs like we dealt with last year, they deal with them effectively. When they're in trouble, they spray on a 4 or 5 day interval. Trying to get a grower to spray on a 7-day interval was like almost impossible. So if you're in trouble, though, we're going to have to do some things different. And that's where you as growers are going to have to make some decisions to be more proactive with like Diamond or a Thrive On to help stay out of trouble. Does that make sense? Comments or questions? Yeah.
You have that slide, Scott's got about it, what you were talking about, the time between 4 days and 7 days.
I think so. That one? Let me walk you guys through this. And again, this is when you're in trouble, okay? It's when we're in trouble. This is from Mississippi, but it's good information. And actually, if you guys if you want to learn more about plant bugs, it's called Best Management Practices for Tarnished Plant Bug in Cotton. It's a real good little extension publication out of Mississippi. They've dealt with this thing for about 15 years. But what this slide is illustrating, they applied orthene, and it was either at 3/4 or a pound, I don't remember. They had 23 plant bugs per drop, sprayed orthene, dropped it to 8. If you're using a drop cloth, the threshold is 3, so they need to spray again. What they're illustrating on this right-hand side, if they sprayed again 4 days after the first application, they achieved 100% control. If they sprayed again, this population, 5 days after the first spray, they still obtained 100% control. If they sprayed 6 days, it dropped to 70. If they sprayed 7-day interval, it dropped to 20. Y'all see that? The other thing, we want to keep pesticides on target. We want to get them to the desired target. The desired target for these immature plant bugs is in that canopy. It's got to get in there. If you don't get it in there, you ain't going to do it. The best thing we can do is stay on top of this thing and not get behind. All right? Other questions or comments? I still have confidence in Bidrin. We need to be at a full dose. No less than 6. I know there were areas up there where you were, Bo, of orthene looked better. Again, Georgia's a big place, but I still have confidence there. I mean, really, if it's just plant bugs, Transform's going to be our choice. And we were forced doing things we didn't want to do. The problem with Transform is it's not going to have any activity on stink bugs. So it would have to be tank mixed. You could tank mix it with bifenthrin. Kind of our reaction last year, we started adding stuff to bifenthrin. And then before it was over, we were going full doses of Bidrin and orthene. And it was just hard. In hindsight, you do stuff different. And there wasn't a lot of Transform went out in August and September. But maybe it should have, So we'll just take it as we come. But I have not lost confidence. I have lost confidence in the pyrethroids. So one of the things I'd encourage you to look at in our production guide, we have a little rating chart of how stuff works. We readjusted all those ratings, and pyrethroids are now not showing very much. I'll be around. It is 9:50, but I'll stay as long as y'all want to stay and talk about insects. I like it. But glad y'all are here today. Let's hope we have a good one. I had some real quick comment. I had a man tell me, say, how are we going to make it this year? I said, it ain't but one way. We got to make more of it. All right, so let's hope we have a good year. Yes, corn earworms. If you're still planting Bollgard 2, which I don't know if we are, so we monitor performance every year. We drop below 70% reduction in damage with 2-gene BT cottons. 3-gene BT cottons, I get more pictures from agents and consultants. They're becoming more common to see an escape in Bollgard 3, but everything is still good. It's usually singles you see in a field. We actually had populations from Miller County, Tift County, and Sumter County. We had screened for susceptibility to VIP. All 3 populations were more susceptible to VIP than the laboratory control we compare it to. So it's all good news. Good news. The other thing on corn earworm, we're not going to kill them with a pyrethroid. Okay? That has got worse and worse and worse. So if you're in another crop where there's not many crops we're going to spray corn earworms on, maybe grain headworms or something, I don't believe you'll touch them now. Okay? Y'all have a great day.